Welcome back for session 7.2. In this session, we're going to be working with a couple more controls and showing you how those work. Let's get started. The first controls we're going to show you in this session are going to be the date and time values. In this example in HTML5, you can just use the type of date or date time to be able to pop up a calendar control. Originally, you would just have to hope that the user would enter the dates correctly. You would use some validation text to make sure that they did, but in general, they would have to type in 8/15/2002 to get the right answer. Now we can use a calendar control, which pops down beautifully and makes things look nice. The thing to remember with these controls is that they are browser specific. So each different browser has their own controls. We can do a little bit of formatting on them, but in general, we just kind of have to go with the control as it comes from the browser. There are some third-party devices that you can, or products that you can use to make them more customized, but these are the HTML5 ones that we're going to use. So let's show you how the date time values can be used in calendar controls. We're going to go ahead and add in our date field now over here in our Share Our Experience. That's going to be underneath our Share Our Experience in our regular rbsurvey.html. We're going to go ahead and add in a div for our form row because we're doing that. And it will go ahead and make that a nice formatting so that everything is the same. We're going to add our label. We're going to say it's for visit because we're going to have our date of visit be called visit. Date of visit. And we are going to add our input. Its name is going to be visit date. So that'll be the name that goes across to the server. Our ID is going to be visit. So it matches our label, what we said there. And its type is going to be a date. When we refresh our page, you'll see it comes up here and you see how it makes that calendar control that we talked about. It's already defaulted and we can set in a default date there, but for this purposes, it just put it as the 5th of September. So we can select whichever date we wanted from there and it will pop it in automatically. The next option that we have is a drop-down or a selection list. We call them selection lists because they give people options. So if you try to remember the word select for selection list and then the options of the selection, that will help you to remember what the name of the element is. It is not called a drop-down. It is called a select. So we use a select list, which we have a name and an ID, just the way we do with text boxes. But nested inside of our selection, we have our options, and each of those options has their own value. So we can have options inside of a given select box, and those are going to be the ones that pop up when you have the drop-down. Remember, they must be nested entirely inside the selection to get them to work. Those values are going to be the value that's going to be sent across when something is selected. And the term that we use to define something as being selected is selected. So if you want a default value for a select box, you simply need to add selected as an attribute of one of the options. And that will give you the default value for that choice. You can also have the option of selecting multiple elements. So you have multiple selections and you can do this with like an Alt or a Shift and then multiple selections. We can also give it the size of how many of those items do we want to show at a time without a scroll bar. And then we can add a scroll bar in if it has more than those options. So let's go look what a select box looks like. The next thing that we're going to add is our selection list. Now remember, this is going to be our option list of what did we want the, what type of visit were we going to be doing. So inside of our Share Your Experience, underneath the div for the form row here, we're going to add another form row. Div class equals form row. And we are going to add a label because you got to have your label. It's going to be for the order. That'll be like our order type. Order type. And we'll create our selection. Remember, select not selection. I keep saying selection, but I want to make sure you get select out of that. Its name is going to be order type, and its ID is going to be order, because remember that has to match what we've named it. Inside of our order, we're going to have 4 options. So our first option is going to be value, and we're just going to call it order 1. We'll know that over on the other side when we get to the server. That order 1 is always carry out. In this case, I'm going to just copy and paste a little bit to add our 4 option types. So our second, order 2, is going to be delivery. Our third, order 3, is going to be dine in, and we're going to figure that one will show up the most. So we're going to make that one selected, and that will be our default value. And our order 4 is going to be our take and bake, like our Papa Murphy's. So now you can see that our order type has come and it is defaulted to the dine in. Even though dine in is our third option, it's defaulted to that one. And you can see we can still select anything from in here, but that dine in is going to be our default. We're going to go ahead and add another drop down, but we're going to have this one be more of a list box. So in this case, we are going to be creating the list box over here that is going to say, where did you hear about us, underneath the email. So we're going to create our div. Our class is going to be form row. And inside of that, our label. And it's before our info. Where'd you hear from us? We're going to throw in a little bit of HTML here to let them know. Select all that apply. Because we're going to let them use multiple selections here. So we're going to do a select. Its name is going to be info source. Its ID is going to be info. It is going to be a size of 5 because we're going to have 5 options here. And we're going to tell them they can use multiple. Inside, we're going to write our options. Value is going to be internet. So what we can see is that because we gave it a height of 5, even though it's the same kind of code as this order type up over here, we gave it a size of 5, so it filled in and let us see all 5 at the same time. You'll see how that where did you hear about us will wrap as necessary, and it just kind of keeps its form no matter what, which is nice. We did not put a default on this one because we weren't sure. But if I hold down my control button, you can see that I can select multiple items. So that was kind of the point of this one, because there may be multiple ways that they heard about us. One of the nice things with select boxes is that we do have the option of doing option groups. So we can group our options. In the example that we have here, we're going to be going and having the appetizers and then the salads separated. So we can have an option title, or in this case called a label, for the option group, opt group. And then we can have multiple options underneath it. And that just gives us a way of kind of breaking down the options and giving us the options of being able to have multiple items in there. If we wanted to select an appetizer and a salad, we could use that control select to select multiple items. And that gives you some options. One of the other things that we wanted to talk about at this point is hidden fields. Not all fields that are going to get sent across to the server need to be showing. We can have some fields that are hidden. This is sometimes useful for like a client ID or a date, something like that that's going to go across, but you don't really want the person to have to enter or see that information. So we can make text fields or input boxes be hidden, and that allows them to not be shown, but still get passed across in your field set. Next, we're going to do our radio boxes, and we call these option boxes or option buttons because they give us the choice between a yes and a no, a true and a false. The point is you can only have one of them be selected. So in the case that we have here, we have was your service friendly, and we have a yes or a no. We don't want them to be able to select both of them. we want them to only select one. And if they select one and the other one was already selected, we want that to no longer be selected. What we do in this case is we set the name of the input to be the same name. And the values are the different values. So yes and no would be the different values, and the names would all be the same. That means that when the data gets sent across to the server, only the value that is selected or checked in this example is going to be the one that's sent. The other values are not. So we can go ahead and have a default for this as by adding that checked attribute. The word is just checked with an ed as in past tense, and it doesn't have a value. You just say checked inside the attributes section of your input text box or your input element. So let's go look at what these look like when we did our service being friendly. We're going to create our 3 radio buttons going down the side over here that are going to ask about our service and order and so on and so forth. So back over in our experience info, instead of our customer info, we're going to go below our order type and add in another class for our radio button for our first one. We're going to do a div class equals form row. This is why we like to have classes like form row, so that they're really easy to just keep using. Everything stays fine. We're going to have our label. Was your service friendly? Question mark. Now, at this point, we are going to create an interior field set for our option group. So we are going to make a field set inside. Remember, we're already in a field set. We're in this field set here, our experience info. We're going to make another field set inside of it, nested, with a class of option group. This is going to allow us to put in our radio buttons in this section, but because they are in their own class, if we wanted to, we could use some different CSS. We are then going to add another label for the first one. So we're going to say for friendly yes, so F yes. And then we're going to add in our input. Name is sFriend. ID is F yes, because that's the one it goes with. And our value is yes. Finally, its type is radio. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste a little bit here to get the other 2 options. So this is going to be for F no. So if our friendly was no, make sure you change the word no. Still the same name as friend because we want it to be the same, but our ID is different and our value is different, but it is still a radio button. So we're going to hit save and come back over here. So you can see now it says, was your service friendly? Put them in a radio box. Because we made them in their own field set, they put a box around them, which is why we like to do that in its own field set, being able to format that. And as you can see, I can click yes or no, but I can't click them both. So it will automatically turn off the other one if necessary. I'm going to go ahead and add the other radio buttons for this section. We always like to check our code in the middle there to make sure that it's working fine. And finally, we'll put our last one, was your food hot? All right, so we've got our 3 radio buttons here set up. As opposed to radio buttons, we can also create check boxes. These are individual, so you can have multiple check boxes and you can check some and uncheck others, and there isn't any limitation on which ones are being checked. Check boxes are either on or off, checked or unchecked. To show that they are checked, you would add the checked attribute. To be unchecked, you just leave it blank. And when they get checked, they will set that checked attribute. They are not related to other checkboxes the way radio boxes are, though. So try to remember that. And then, of course, you're going to want to add a label to those, or else you're just going to have a random checkbox in the middle of nowhere and you're not going to know what it goes to. So make sure that you add your label. If a checkbox is checked, the data will be sent across to the server. If the checkbox is not checked, no data is being sent. So the data is only sent if something is checked. At this point, we're also going to comment on tab index. So when you are in the middle of a form, you can tab to the next item. You can select the tab index by setting the ordering. So I can say my name is 1 and my street is 2. My city, state, zip are 3, 4, and 5. I can set those in order. The browser will usually go in the default order they exist, but you can change the tab index for any given item. You can also remove the tab index by setting it to -1, and that will keep it from tabbing there by default. Next, we're going to go ahead and create our checkbox, and the checkbox is going to go at the bottom of our customer information, and it's just going to say, do you want to be added to the list? So we have our field set. We're going to go to the bottom of the field set, and we're just going to add an input name equals mail me. Sorry. ID is mail CB. The value that we want to be sent across to the server is going to be yes. And we're going to add its label afterward because that's pretty common with a checkbox to have the words afterward. We're going to say it's for mail CV. And we're going to say add me to your mailing list. See how it added the little checkbox there and then added the text on the other side. All of these, we wanted to have the text, the label on this side with the option here, but for the checkbox, we want to be able to do that. And when we do check it, it's going to change its value to checked. The last type for this session is going to be a text area. Sometimes we want the user to be able to type a couple of lines instead of just being a singular line. And we want them to be able to add enter keys and putting different things in our text area. So with our text area, we are creating an element called a text area as opposed to an input, and it has a name and it can have an ID as well. And then the user can enter text. We can add some default text in there if we'd like, or we can just leave it blank and let the user fill it out. You can set the number of rows and columns you want it to be in size. So if you want it to be 5 rows down, maybe 150 pixels for the column, something like that, you can add those specifically to the text area. We also have a wrap type. The default is soft, which means that any hard returns, line wraps, are not included. We can set those to hard, which will send them to the server. And we'll talk more about that when we actually do the JavaScript setting it to the server on how to handle those hard returns. But for right now, you simply know that you can write them as either a hard or a soft wrap type for a text area. Don't forget your label. And then of course you can always add appropriate CSS to the text area, same way you would with anything else. Refer to it by its either class or its ID. For the last section of this session, we are going to add a text area over here for some comments. So we're going to come down to the bottom of our field set and enter it in here. So for this one, we, again, do not need to have it inside of a div for a form row because it's just going to be a little bit different. We're going to give it a label. And tell us more about your experience. Then we'll add in our text area. Our ID has to match what our 4 was over there. And we're just going to close it. We're not going to add any default text to that. So you can see here that it put in a text area. Now, in this case, the text area could be made bigger or smaller by the user, But we're going to go ahead and add some styles to that so that it gives it a little bit of size, just to help it to fit the space a little bit better. So we're going to go back over to our forms, go to our text area styles, and we're going to do text area. And we're going to set a margin on the top of 10 pixels and a height of 100 pixels and a width of 95% of its parent. Remember, this is its parent here, so it's going to fill up 95% of the parent. We can refresh and you can see it did that. Obviously the sizing fit. And as you get bigger, it will fill in. As you get smaller, it works as well. So being able to set that to a height that is related, or a width related to the parent, was kind of nice to be able to do that. So thanks for watching session 7.2. Please come back next time and we will do a couple of new widgets.